I opened the acceptance letter from Stanford Medical School with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. This was it. Everything I'd worked for since I was 12 years old. Every late night studying, every weekend volunteering at Phoenix Children's Hospital instead of going to parties. I grabbed my phone and called my parents immediately, my voice cracking with excitement as I asked about accessing my college fund. The $57,000 they'd been saving since I was born. My mother went completely silent on the other end. Then I heard it, crying. Soft at first, then harder. My father took the phone from her. His voice was flat, defeated. 3 words that shattered my entire world in an instant. The money's gone. I stood there in my apartment, acceptance letter in one hand, phone pressed against my ear with the other, feeling my entire future collapse in real time. Gone. $57,000. Every penny. My brother Derek's 5th trip to rehab had taken it all. The 2-hour drive from Tempe to my parents' house in suburban Phoenix felt like crossing into another dimension. I kept the acceptance letter on the passenger seat, glancing at it every few minutes to make sure it was real. Stanford Medical School. I'd been obsessing over this since 7th grade, when I shadowed a pediatric surgeon during career day. I'd spent 4 years at Arizona State maintaining a perfect 4.0 grade average. I'd worked part-time since I was 16, first at a grocery store, then as a medical scribe. I'd volunteered hundreds of hours at the Children's Hospital, held leadership positions in pre-med clubs, studied for the MCAT until I could recite organic chemistry formulas in my sleep. And Derek, who is 26 years old now. Derek, who started popping pain pills when he was 19 after a basketball injury. Derek, who'd been through rehab 4 times before this. 4 times my parents had emptied their savings, taken out loans, borrowed from relatives. 4 times Derek had come out promising to stay clean. 4 times he'd relapsed within months. I pulled into their driveway just before sunset. The house looked the same as always, a modest 3-bedroom ranch style with desert landscaping, but everything felt different now, poisoned somehow. I sat in my car for 5 full minutes, trying to prepare myself for what was coming. My mother opened the door before I could knock. Patricia, 53 years old, elementary school teacher. Eyes so red and swollen, she looked like she'd been crying for days. She probably had been. She reached for me, trying to hug me, but I stepped back. I couldn't touch her yet. Not yet. My father sat in his recliner in the living room. Gary, 56 years old, construction foreman, a man who'd worked 60-hour weeks my entire childhood to provide for us. He couldn't look at me, just stared at the television, even though it wasn't on. I sat on the couch across from them, the acceptance letter still in my hand. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The silence was suffocating. Finally, my mother started. Her voice was hoarse, broken. 3 months ago, Derek relapsed again. She found him unconscious in a motel bathroom on the east side of Phoenix, needles still in his arm. The paramedics said another 10 minutes, and he would have been dead. They took him to the hospital, kept him for 3 days, then recommended intensive inpatient treatment, but not just any treatment. A luxury rehab facility in Malibu, ocean view rooms, gourmet meals, yoga and meditation, equine therapy, all the fancy treatments that supposedly worked better than regular rehab. $18,000 per month. My father finally spoke. His voice was rough, defensive. They'd already paid for 3 months. $54,000. The remaining $3,000 from my college fund went to related expenses, transportation, Derek's phone bill, so he could stay in contact, some clothes and toiletries he needed. I felt numb, completely disconnected from my body. I asked the only question that mattered. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask me? My mother's response made me want to scream. You were so focused on your studies. We didn't want to burden you. You had finals, Then you were working on your medical school applications. We thought Derek would finish the program, and everything would be okay, and we'd figure out your school funding when the time came," my father added, his tone suggesting this should be obvious. "He's your brother. He could have died." I looked at them both, really looked at them, and I saw something I'd been avoiding my entire life. In their eyes, Derek would always be the priority. Derek the struggling one. Derek the sick one. Derek, who needed saving. And me. I was Chandler, the capable one. Chandler who got good grades. Chandler who had his life together. Chandler who didn't need help. I asked about financial aid, loans, anything. There had to be options. That's when my father dropped the bomb that made my numbness turn to ice-cold rage. 2 years ago, during Derek's 4th rehab attempt, they'd taken out a Parent Plus loan, $23,000. They'd forged my signature, put it in my name without telling me, used it to pay for that rehab stint, and some of Derek's legal fees from a possession charge. The loan was in my name, my credit, and they'd missed payments, multiple payments. My credit score had been damaged, tanked, actually. My chances of getting additional loans for medical school were essentially zero. No bank would touch me. I stood up slowly. My hands were shaking again, but not from excitement this time, from rage. Pure, cold rage that I'd been suppressing my entire life. I asked them one more question. Does Derek even know about this? About my college fund? My mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. We told him yesterday. He feels terrible. I almost laughed. Derek felt terrible. Derek, who'd stolen from them countless times. Derek, who'd pawned my mother's jewelry. Derek, who'd wrecked 2 cars. Derek felt terrible. I walked toward the door. My mother called after me, pleading, "Where are you going?" "We need to talk about this. We're a family." I turned back to look at them one last time. I didn't yell, didn't scream. Just spoke in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. "You made a choice. You chose Derek. You've always chosen Derek. I understand that. But don't expect me to pretend this is okay." I got in my car and drove away. I didn't say goodbye. I blocked both their numbers before I got back on the freeway. During the drive home, my phone buzzed 3 times. Missed calls from Stanford's financial aid office. I pulled over at a rest stop and stared at the notifications, my stomach sinking deeper with each passing second. Whatever they wanted to tell me. I knew it wouldn't be good news. I returned the call to Stanford's financial aid office at 8 in the morning the next day. I'd been awake all night, lying on my couch, staring at the ceiling, my mind running through scenarios that all ended the same way. Failure. A woman named Miss Harper answered. Her voice was professional but warm. She congratulated me on my acceptance, then explained why she'd been trying to reach me. I'd been selected for a merit scholarship, the Dean's Excellence Award. It would cover half of my tuition for all 4 years of medical school, $20,000 per year. For exactly 3 seconds, I felt hope surge through my chest. Then Miss Harper continued talking, and that hope died instantly. The scholarship required immediate acceptance. I had 2 weeks to confirm my enrollment and provide proof of funding for the remaining costs. Tuition at Stanford Medical School was roughly $80,000 per year. The scholarship covered $20,000. That left $60,000 per year I needed to account for. Then there was housing in Palo Alto, one of the most expensive areas in the country. Books, living expenses, equipment. The total cost was closer to $100,000 per year. Federal student loans maxed out at $20,500 annually for medical students. Even with those loans and the scholarship, I was still short about $15,000 per year. $60,000 total for 4 years. I had $2,300 in my personal savings account. Money I'd been setting aside from my job as a medical scribe at Phoenix General Hospital. $19 per hour, 30 hours per week. I thanked Miss Harper and told her I'd get back to her soon. My voice stayed steady. Professional. I didn't let her hear the panic. After I hung up, I sat on my apartment floor and did the math, over and over, hoping I'd made a mistake. I hadn't. I called my undergraduate advisor, Dr. Brennan, the biology professor who'd written one of my recommendation letters. He'd mentored me through my entire application process, helped me prepare for interviews, celebrated with me when I got in. He listened while I explained everything. The college fund, the loan fraud, the scholarship that wasn't enough. His response was sympathetic but devastating. Stanford's incoming class was already full. If I deferred my acceptance for a year, my spot wasn't guaranteed. I'd have to reapply and compete against a whole new pool of applicants. Medical school admissions were getting more competitive every year. My MCAT score was excellent, but it wouldn't stay competitive forever. There were students taking the test now who were scoring higher with newer prep resources. Time was not on my side. I spent the next 3 days in a desperate research spiral. Private loans required cosigners and came with interest rates between 18 and 25%. My parents couldn't cosign, not with their destroyed credit and existing debt. Military programs like the Health Professions Scholarship Program had application deadlines that had already passed. Work-study programs at Stanford didn't come close to covering the gap. I looked into accelerated nursing programs, thinking maybe I could become a nurse practitioner instead, but that felt like giving up on everything I'd worked for. My girlfriend Emily came over on the third night. We'd been dating for 2 years, met in an organic chemistry study group junior year. She was sweet, supportive, studying to be an occupational therapist. She suggested I take a gap year, work full-time, save money, reapply next cycle. I tried to explain that this was already essentially a gap year. I'd graduated from ASU at 20, a year early, because I'd taken summer classes and maxed out my credit hours every semester. I'd spent this past year working to build my resume, getting more clinical experience, preparing applications. Emily didn't understand why I couldn't just figure it out with my family. They were going through a hard time. Derek was sick. Addiction was a disease. Surely we could all sit down and work something out. That's when I realized Emily had no idea what my family was really like. I'd shielded her from most of it. The chaos. The constant crises. The way Derek's problems had consumed everything for years. She thought this was a one-time emergency. She didn't understand this was a pattern. Our conversation turned into an argument. She called me stubborn. Said I was too proud to accept help. Too rigid in my thinking. I asked her to leave. She did. But not before saying I was making a mistake. By cutting off my parents. The crack in our relationship became a canyon. 2 days later, with 1 week left until Stanford's deadline, my phone rang from an unknown California number. I answered, hoping it was Stanford calling with some miraculous solution. It was Derek's rehab facility. A counselor named Brandon. Derek had listed me as his emergency contact. He'd left the facility 3 days ago. AMA. Against medical advice. Just walked out. In the middle of the 30-day program. The $54,000 my parents paid was non-refundable. Derek left after 21 days. He'd spent over $2,500 per day, and he didn't even finish. Brandon asked if I knew where Derek might be. If I'd heard from him. He strongly recommended Derek return to complete treatment. The first 30 days were critical. I told Brandon I hadn't heard from Derek, and I wouldn't be helping to find him. Then I hung up. I sat on my apartment floor, acceptance letter on the coffee table in front of me, and I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid. I punched the wall. Hard. My fist went through the drywall, leaving a hole about the size of a dinner plate. I stared at the hole, at my bleeding knuckles, and realized I'd just destroyed part of my rental. That would come out of my security deposit, money I didn't have. My phone rang again. My mother. She'd gotten the same call from the rehab facility. Her voice on the voicemail was hysterical. Derek was missing. We needed to find him. I needed to help. What kind of brother was I? I deleted the voicemail without listening to the whole thing, but she called again and again. 17 times in 2 hours. Finally, I answered. My mother was screaming before I could even say hello. Where was my brother? How could I ignore her calls when Derek was missing? What kind of person was I? Something inside me snapped. Every year of suppressed resentment. Every sacrifice I'd made while Derek got endless chances. Every time my achievements were overshadowed by his crises. It all came flooding out. I told her about every birthday Derek had ruined by showing up high. About the family vacation to San Diego when I was 14 that got canceled because Derek stole money from Dad's wallet and they couldn't afford it anymore. About my high school graduation where Derek caused a scene in the parking lot. Fighting with his dealer. And we had to leave early. About my college acceptance to ASU with a partial scholarship, and how there was no celebration because Derek was in jail that week for possession. I told her I'd spent my entire life being the easy one. The one who didn't cause problems. The one who got good grades and didn't need attention. And my reward for that was to have my entire future stolen to fund Derek's 5th attempt at getting clean. My father grabbed the phone from her. His voice was defensive, angry. They'd made the best decision they could at the time. They were trying to save Derek's life. Did I want my brother to die? Was I that selfish? That word. Selfish. It detonated something in me. I asked him if it was selfish to want the money that was saved for me since birth. If it was selfish to be angry about loan fraud. If it was selfish to expect my parents to at least tell me before they destroyed my credit. My father's response was something I'll never forget. You're smart, Chandler. You'll figure something out. You always do. Derek can't help himself. He's sick. You're capable. You don't need us. There it was. The truth I'd always known, but they'd never said out loud. I was being punished for being capable. For not being broken. For doing everything right. I told them I was done. Finished. They'd made their choice. And I was making mine. My mother grabbed the phone back. Her voice turned vicious in a way I'd never heard before. What kind of brother are you? Derek could be dead in a ditch somewhere. And you won't even help look for him. You're disgusting. You're selfish and cold, and I didn't raise you to be like this. I hung up. Blocked both numbers again. Then blocked my father's work phone. Then blocked their emails. Emily texted me an hour later. She'd talked to her parents about the situation. They agreed with my parents. Family came first. Blood was thicker than water. I was being cold and unforgiving. I asked her whose side she was on. She said there shouldn't be sides. That was the problem. We broke up over text. She said she couldn't be with someone who would abandon their family in a crisis. She came by the next day while I was at work and took her things from my apartment. Her key was on the kitchen counter when I got home. I was completely alone now. No family, no girlfriend, no future. Stanford's deadline was 9 days away. I swallowed what was left of my pride and created a GoFundMe campaign. I wrote out the entire story. My college fund, my brother's addiction, the loan fraud, the scholarship that wasn't enough. I needed $60,000 to attend medical school. Any amount would help. I shared it on social media, sent it to extended family members, posted it in medical school forums and pre-med groups. After 3 days, I'd raised $800. Better than nothing, but nowhere close to enough. The comments section made everything worse. Half the comments were supportive, but the other half were brutal. Why didn't you save your own money? You're 21. You should be financially independent by now. Family comes first. Your brother is sick, and you're worried about money. Sounds like you're not mature enough for medical school anyway. One comment especially stung. From a cousin I barely knew. This is a private family matter. Airing this publicly is disrespectful and manipulative. I'm disappointed in you. I deleted the GoFundMe, sent the $800 back to the donors. I couldn't handle the judgment. 6 days until Stanford's deadline. At 2 in the morning on day 7, someone pounded on my apartment door. Aggressive, relentless pounding. I looked through the peephole. Derek. He looked terrible. Skinny, greasy hair, pupils dilated, high out of his mind. I opened the door, but kept the chain lock engaged. Asked him what he wanted. He pushed against the door, laughing. Actually laughing. He'd heard about the college fund situation. Mom had told him. He thought it was hilarious that I was mad about money. His exact words. "You're mad about money? Are you serious? Grow up, Chandler. Money comes and goes. Mom and Dad will forgive you if you just apologize to them. Stop being such a baby." I told him to leave. He ignored me, kept rambling. Asked if I could loan him $200. Just $200. He needed it for food. He'd pay me back next week when his disability check came. Derek had been collecting disability for a back injury that didn't exist. Another scam. I refused. Told him to leave, or I'd call the police. His demeanor changed instantly. The laughter stopped. His eyes went cold. He threatened me. Said I'd always thought I was better than him. Always looked down on him. He was sick of it. He shoved against the door hard enough that the chain lock strained. I had to physically push the door closed and throw the deadbolt. Derek screamed through the door for 10 minutes straight. Obscenities. Threats. Saying I was dead to the family. Saying he'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. Eventually he left. I heard his footsteps down the hallway, then the stairwell door slamming. I sat on my floor, back against the door, until the sun came up. My acceptance letter was still on the coffee table. I picked it up and read it again. Stanford, medical school. The dream I'd chased for 9 years. It felt like holding a lottery ticket that I'd won, but couldn't cash. My email pinged. Stanford Financial Aid Office. 5 days left to confirm enrollment and submit a financial plan. I had nothing. No plan, no money, no family, no options. I was drowning. With 5 days left before Stanford's deadline, I made a decision born from pure desperation. I was going to take out private loans. The predatory ones, with interest rates, that would bury me in debt for decades. I didn't care anymore. I'd work full-time during medical school if I had to. I'd figure it out. I found a lender called Rehab-5th Financial online. They specialized in high-risk educational loans. Their terms were horrible. 22% interest. Payments starting immediately, even while I was in school. But they'd loan me $40,000 if I could find a cosigner. My parents obviously couldn't do it. Their credit was destroyed. I started calling extended family members. My Aunt Diane, my mother's younger sister, said no immediately. She didn't want to get involved in family drama. My Uncle Mark, my father's brother, said he would think about it but never called back. My mother's oldest brother, Raymond, was my last option. He lived in Scottsdale, ran a successful contracting business, had money. We weren't close, but he'd always been kind to me at family gatherings. I drove to his house and explained everything. I didn't hide anything. The college fund, Derek's 5th rehab, the loan fraud, the scholarship, the gap I couldn't fill. Raymond listened, really listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, he said yes. He'd cosign. He believed in me. He'd watched me work hard my entire life. He said someone needed to bet on me for once. I almost cried right there in his kitchen. We set up an appointment with Rehab-5th Financial for the following Tuesday. 3 days away. Plenty of time before Stanford's deadline. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Real. tangible hope. I'd be drowning in debt, but I'd be at Stanford. I'd become a doctor. I could handle the debt later. I went to work at the hospital that evening feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I was a medical scribe in the emergency department, following doctors around, documenting patient encounters. It was chaotic work, but I loved it. It kept me close to medicine. My supervisor, Dr. Patel, noticed the change in my mood immediately. She was sharp like that. Mid-40s, emergency medicine specialist, tough but fair. She asked if everything was okay. I'd been distracted for weeks, making small errors in documentation, showing up looking exhausted. I broke down and told her everything. The whole story came pouring out. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to anger to sympathy. When I finished, she told me something I didn't know. The hospital had a grant program for employees pursuing advanced medical education. If I stayed working at Phoenix General full-time, I could apply for educational grants that covered up to $10,000 per year. My heart leapt. $10,000 per year would make a massive difference. Combined with Raymond's co-signing and the private loan, I might actually be able to reduce my debt burden. I researched the program immediately on my break. Then my hope crashed again. The grant required 3 years of full-time employment before eligibility. I'd been working at Phoenix General for 14 months. Even if I waited, I'd need to work another 22 months before I could apply. That meant deferring medical school for 2 years minimum. And even then, the grant only covered $10,000 per year. Dr. Patel saw my face fall. She pulled me aside later and quietly told me something else. The grant program had funding cuts last year. There was talk of eliminating it entirely. She wasn't supposed to tell me that. But she wanted me to know the reality. It might not even exist in 2 years. I thanked her and went back to work, feeling hollow. But at least I still had Raymond. At least I had the loan approval on Tuesday. That weekend, my landlord slipped a notice under my door. The apartment building had been sold. All tenants needed to vacate within 60 days. He apologized profusely. It wasn't his choice. I looked at rental prices in Phoenix. Everything had gone up. The housing market was inflating rapidly. My current rent was $950 per month for a 1-bedroom. The cheapest comparable apartment I could find was $1,200 per month. I couldn't afford an extra $250 per month. Not with my current salary. Not with student loan payments starting immediately on the private loan. I'd have to move somewhere cheaper, probably a studio, probably in a worse neighborhood. My commute to the hospital would get longer. I'd spend more on gas. Everything was getting worse, not better. But I still had Tuesday. I still had Raymond and the loan approval. That was the lifeline. Monday evening, my phone rang. Raymond's number. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He couldn't co-sign the loan. He was backing out. My mother had called him. She'd cried for 2 hours on the phone, telling him that Derek was missing and possibly suicidal, that the family was falling apart, that if Raymond helped me go to Stanford, it would enable me to abandon the family when they needed me most, that helping me would be choosing one nephew over another. Raymond had lost his own son to addiction 10 years ago. Opioid overdose at 23 years old. My mother knew this. She'd weaponized his grief. Raymond apologized. His voice was thick with emotion. He said he couldn't go through that pain again, even by proxy. He couldn't help me if it meant potentially contributing to Derek's death. He knew it wasn't logical, but he couldn't do it. I understood. I told him I understood. And I did. But understanding didn't change the fact that my last option had just evaporated. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment in the dark. Stanford's deadline was 3 days away. I had no money, no cosigner, no options. The hole in my wall from where I'd punched it was still there, unrepaired. A perfect metaphor for everything. Dr. Patel had given me her personal cell number weeks ago, when she'd first noticed I was struggling. She'd told me to call if I ever needed anything. I called her at 11 at night, apologized for the late hour, told her the Raymond situation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that shattered what was left of my hope. The hospital grant wasn't the only issue. Even if the program still existed in 2 years, even if I qualified, medical school admissions were getting more competitive every single year. My MCAT score was strong now, but in 2 years it would be average. The average matriculant GPA had increased. The average number of clinical hours had increased. Everything was escalating. If I didn't take Stanford's acceptance now, I might never get another chance at a school that caliber. I might not get into any medical school. My window was closing. Not just for Stanford. For medicine, entirely. She didn't say it to be cruel. She said it because it was true. I thanked her and hung up. Pulled up my laptop. Opened a blank email addressed to Miss Harper at Stanford's financial aid office. I wrote out a formal decline of admission. Expressed my gratitude for the opportunity. Explained that due to unforeseen financial circumstances, I would be unable to attend. My cursor hovered over the send button. I couldn't click it. Not yet. Instead, I closed the laptop and went to bed. I had 2 days left. Maybe something would change. Maybe some miracle would happen. But I knew the truth. Miracles didn't happen to people like me. I went to Phoenix General Hospital the next morning for my shift, but I couldn't focus. I made 3 documentation errors in the first hour. Dr. Patel pulled me aside and told me to take the day off. I was clearly not in the right headspace. I left the hospital and drove around Phoenix aimlessly for 2 hours. Eventually, I ended up back at the hospital. But instead of going to the emergency department, I went to the chapel on the 2nd floor. I'm not religious. Haven't been to church since I was a kid. But the chapel was quiet. And I needed quiet. I sat in the back row and stared at the plain wooden cross on the wall. I'd worked so hard, done everything right, and I was going to lose everything because of choices other people made. An older man sat down next to me. I recognized him vaguely, Dr. Weinstein. Semi-retired physician who volunteered in the hospital's clinic a few days a week. He had to be in his 70s. Silver hair, kind eyes. He didn't ask why I was there, just sat quietly for a few minutes. Then he spoke. "You look like someone carrying the weight of the world." I laughed bitterly, told him that was pretty accurate. He asked if I wanted to talk about it. Something about him felt safe. Maybe because he was a stranger. Maybe because he was old enough that he'd seen everything. I told him the whole story. Every detail. The college fund, Derek, the loan fraud, Stanford, the deadline that was now 36 hours away. Dr. Weinstein listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he told me his story. He grew up in poverty in Detroit. His father was an alcoholic who abandoned the family when Dr. Weinstein was 8. His mother worked 3 jobs to keep them housed and fed. He was smart, did well in school, but there was no money for college. He worked construction for 6 years after high school, saved every penny, lived in a room he rented from a family friend for $50 a month, ate 1 meal a day. At 24, he enrolled in community college. At 26, he transferred to Wayne State University. At 30, he applied to medical school. He got into Wayne State's medical school at 32 years old, one of the oldest students in his class. He graduated at 36, did his residency, became a family medicine doctor. He was now 73. "The path isn't always straight," he said, "but it doesn't disappear unless you walk away from it completely." He pulled out a business card, wrote his personal cell number on the back, and handed it to me. "Call me if you need advice." or just someone to talk to. I thanked him. Felt something shift inside me. Not hope exactly, but perspective. I left the chapel with a new plan. Not the plan I wanted, but a plan. I would defer Stanford for 1 year. I'd work 2 jobs. 60, 70 hours per week. I'd live as cheaply as possible. I'd save every penny. In 1 year, I might have $30,000 saved. It wouldn't be enough for Stanford, but it would be enough to attend a state medical school. University of Arizona had a good program. I could live at home, save on housing. I wouldn't get Stanford, but I wouldn't lose medicine. I spent the rest of the day doing the math, ran the numbers a dozen different ways. It was tight, but possible. That evening, I emailed Miss Harper at Stanford. I explained my situation honestly, thanked them for the opportunity, expressed that I intended to reapply next year and would be working to make attendance financially possible. Miss Harper responded within an hour. Her email was kind, sympathetic. She wished me luck and said she hoped to see my application again next cycle. It hurt. Closing that door hurt more than I expected. But at least I still had a path forward. 2 days later, my father showed up at my apartment. I hadn't unblocked their numbers, so he just came in person. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. He looked terrible, exhausted, 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. Derek had been found. He'd come home on his own 3 days ago. Said he was ready to try again, ready to get clean for real this time. My father wanted me to come to a family therapy session. The rehab facility had recommended it. They needed to address family dynamics that might be contributing to Derek's addiction. I almost said no immediately. But something in my father's face stopped me. He looked desperate, broken. He said he knew I was angry. He knew they'd messed up. But we were still family. Could I please just come to one session? Just one. I was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being angry. Tired of carrying this weight. I agreed to one session. Just one. The therapy session was scheduled for the following Thursday at a practice in Scottsdale, Dr. Moreno's office. She specialized in family therapy and addiction recovery. I arrived exactly on time. My parents were already there, sitting in the waiting room. My mother's eyes were red. She tried to hug me. I tolerated it but didn't hug back. Derek walked in 5 minutes late. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him. Clean clothes, shower. But his eyes were shifty. Wouldn't make direct contact with mine. Dr. Moreno called us back into her office. It was a typical therapy setup. Couch, chairs arranged in a circle, box of tissues on the side table, abstract art on the walls. We all Saturday, Dr. Moreno introduced herself, explained the process. This was a safe space. Everyone would have a chance to speak. The goal was understanding and healing. She asked me to start, to explain how I was feeling. I took a breath and spoke honestly. I explained the college fund, the betrayal, the loan fraud, the damage to my future. I kept my voice calm, factual. I wasn't trying to attack anyone. I was just stating facts. My parents listened, my mother crying quietly, my father staring at his hands. Dr. Moreno validated my feelings, said it was understandable I felt hurt and betrayed. Asked my parents to respond. My father apologized, said they'd made mistakes. They'd been focused on Derek's immediate crisis and hadn't thought about the long-term consequences for me. My mother said they loved both of us equally. They'd done what they thought they had to do to save Derek's life. It felt like progress. Painful, but real. Then Derek spoke. He started crying. Not just crying. Sobbing. A performance. Worthy of an Oscar. He said he felt terrible about everything. About being such a burden. About taking resources that should have gone to me. About ruining the family. But then, his tone shifted. He said he'd always felt like the failure of the family. like he could never measure up to me. I was so smart, so accomplished, so perfect. And he was just the screw-up, the disappointment. He said my obsession with success, with being the best, had always made him feel worthless. Like he didn't matter unless he was achieving something. And when he couldn't achieve anything, when he felt like a failure, drugs were the only thing that made him feel okay. Dr. Moreno started asking questions, exploring this dynamic. How family expectations affect individual self-worth. How comparison between siblings can be damaging. The session was shifting. Subtly at first. Then obviously, my mother jumped in. Said she'd always worried about putting too much pressure on Derek because I made everything look so easy. Maybe if they'd supported Derek more emotionally instead of praising my achievements so much, he wouldn't have felt so inadequate. My father agreed. Said maybe they'd created an environment where Derek felt he had to be perfect like me, and when he couldn't, he gave up entirely. I sat there, stunned, as the therapy session transformed into an analysis of how my success had damaged Derek. Dr. Moreno, who didn't know our full history, started exploring this narrative. She asked me if I'd ever considered how my achievements might have affected Derek's self-esteem. I tried to push back, tried to explain that I'd never made Derek feel bad, that I'd supported him through every relapse, that my success wasn't an attack on him. But my mother interrupted. Her voice was sharp, accusatory. "If you'd been a more compassionate brother," she said, "maybe Derek wouldn't have needed drugs to cope with feeling like a failure." The words hung in the air like poison. Derek was still crying, nodding along, playing his role perfectly. I realized what this was. A trap. Derek had manipulated them all. The therapy session wasn't about healing. It was about shifting blame from him to me. I stood up, told Dr. Moreno this wasn't productive. Walked out. My mother called after me. My father tried to follow. I ignored them both. I got to my car, hands shaking with rage, and sat in the parking lot trying to calm down. That's when I saw Derek through the window. He'd come outside, was standing near the entrance, talking on his phone. He was laughing. Actually laughing. His whole crying, devastated act had vanished instantly. I rolled down my window slightly. Could hear fragments of his conversation. Got them all to blame Chandler. Parents feel so guilty now, they'll probably buy me whatever I want. He was completely sober, completely manipulative. The therapy session had been a calculated move. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after he went back inside, processing what I'd just witnessed. Derek wasn't a victim of addiction. He was a con artist who used addiction as a cover. And my parents were so deep in their enabling that they couldn't see it. Something crystallized in me in that moment. A cold, clear determination. I was done being the collateral damage of Derek's manipulations. I was done protecting people who wouldn't protect me. I was going to take action. Real action. I spent the next 3 days doing research. Deep research into legal options, criminal statutes, case law. I barely slept. I was running on caffeine and cold fury. The parent plus loan situation was fraud. Taking out a loan in someone else's name without their consent, forging their signature, that was identity theft. A criminal offense. I could report my parents to the police, could sue them in civil court for damages. The case was strong, but I didn't want to destroy my parents. They were enablers, yes. They'd made terrible choices. But they genuinely thought they were saving Derek's life. Derek was different. Derek was a predator. I started digging into his financial history. It wasn't hard. Derek was careless. He'd bragged about scams before, thinking they were funny stories. I found his GoFundMe campaigns. There were 3 of them over the past 6 months, all claiming he had cancer. Testicular cancer in one, lymphoma in another, leukemia in the third. The campaigns were sophisticated. He'd used stock photos of cancer patients that he found online and ran through filters to make them less recognizable. He'd written detailed, Heartbreaking stories about his diagnosis, his treatment, his struggle. He'd raised $11,400 total. All of it was fraud. Derek didn't have cancer. He'd never had cancer. I took screenshots of everything. The campaigns, the photos, the stories. I reverse image searched every photo and found the original sources. I compiled a file with every piece of evidence. Then I found people he'd scammed. He'd received donations from family, friends, people from my parents' church, old high school classmates who'd seen the campaigns and wanted to help. I reached out to them anonymously at first, asking if they'd donated to Derek's cancer funds. Several confirmed they had. They asked why I was asking. I told them the truth, showed them the evidence. Every single one of them was furious. One woman, Jennifer, a friend of my mother's from her book club, had donated $800. She'd organized a fundraiser at her church that raised another $2,000. She was devastated when I showed her the proof that Derek had lied. I told her and the others that I was going to report Derek to the police for fraud. I asked if they'd be willing to provide statements. They all agreed. Some were crying, some were angry. All of them wanted justice. I also contacted a local investigative reporter, Julie Tran. She worked for a Phoenix news station and had done several pieces on charity fraud. I sent her the full file. She called me within 2 hours. Said this was exactly the kind of story she covered. Asked if I'd be willing to go on camera. I said yes. Then I went to the Phoenix Police Department and filed a formal report. Brought all my evidence. The officer who took my statement was a woman named Sergeant Martinez. She reviewed everything carefully. She told me Derek would likely face multiple felony charges, wire fraud, identity theft related to the fake cancer campaigns. Each count carried potential prison time. Did I understand that filing this report would likely result in my brother going to jail? I said yes. I understood completely. The day after I filed the police report, my mother found out. I don't know how. Maybe the police contacted them as part of the investigation. Maybe Derek figured it out. She showed up at my new apartment. I'd moved the week before, into a cheaper studio in a worse part of Phoenix. $650 a month. No air conditioning. Bugs. But it was what I could afford. My mother pounded on the door so hard I thought she'd break it. I opened it, and she stormed in without being invited. She was hysterical, screaming. How could I do this? How could I report my own brother to the police? I was destroying the family. Derek could go to prison. Did I want that? Did I hate him that much? My father was with her. He looked broken. He didn't yell, just kept saying, "Please, Chandler, please drop this. We'll figure something out. Don't do this." I told him calmly that Derek had committed fraud. Multiple times. He'd stolen thousands of dollars from people who thought they were helping someone with cancer. He'd manipulated everyone, including them. He needed to face consequences. My mother got in my face. Her voice was venomous. "You already chose. You chose Derek. You've been choosing him my entire life. I'm just making sure he finally faces the consequences you should have enforced years ago." She slapped me. Hard. Across the face. My cheek burned. My father grabbed her, pulled her back. He was crying now, too. I told them both to leave. Told them if they didn't, I'd call the police on them too for trespassing and assault. My mother screamed at me as my father pulled her toward the door. "You're not my son anymore. You hear me? You're not my son." They left. I locked the door behind them and stood there, my cheek still stinging, and felt nothing. Just emptiness. Julie Tran's story aired 3 days later. It was a 6-minute investigative piece during the evening news. She'd interviewed me, showing my face, using my real name. I explained everything. The cancer fraud. The fake GoFundMe campaigns. The people Derek had scammed. She'd also interviewed several of Derek's victims. Jennifer, the woman from my mother's book club, broke down crying on camera, talking about how betrayed she felt. The story included screenshots of Derek's fake campaigns side by side with the original photos he'd stolen. It included statements from the police confirming an active investigation. The story went viral locally. The news station posted it on social media, and it spread rapidly. Thousands of comments. Most were supportive of me, calling Derek a scumbag, praising me for coming forward. But plenty of comments attacked me too, calling me a snitch, saying families should protect each other no matter what, saying I was vindictive and cruel. I didn't care. I'd stopped caring what people thought. The police issued a warrant for Derek's arrest. He disappeared again. Vanished the day after my parents came to my apartment. He'd known this was coming, but they found him 4 days later. He was at a casino in Albuquerque, New Mexico, using a fake ID. He'd been gambling with money from the fraudulent campaigns. The police arrested him, extradited him back to Arizona. He was charged with 4 felony counts of wire fraud and 1 count of identity theft. He was looking at serious prison time. My extended family turned on me. Aunts, uncles, cousins. They all saw the news story. Half of them thought I was a hero. The other half thought I was a traitor. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. Nobody invited me. I worked my shifts at the hospital, came home to my studio apartment, ate cheap food, saved money. That was my life now. 1 week after Derek's arrest, I got a call from the hospital. My father had been admitted. Heart attack. Massive. I drove to Phoenix General, went straight to the cardiac unit. My mother was in the waiting room, surrounded by relatives. When she saw me, her face contorted with rage and grief. "This is your fault," she screamed. "Your father had a heart attack because of the stress you caused. Because you destroyed this family. Are you happy now?" The relatives stared at me, some with sympathy, most with accusation. I went to the cardiac ICU. My father was in surgery. Triple bypass. The damage to his heart was severe. The surgeon came out 3 hours later. The surgery was successful, but my father's recovery would be long. He'd need months of cardiac rehabilitation. The medical bills would be catastrophic. My parents had okay insurance through my father's construction company, but the out-of-pocket costs would still be enormous, easily $50,000 or more. My mother would have to sell their house. They'd already been struggling financially from Derek's rehab costs. This would bankrupt them completely. I sat in the hospital corridor, alone, while my extended family clustered around my mother. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody looked at me. I'd wanted Derek to face consequences. I'd wanted justice, but had I gone too far? Was my father's heart attack my fault? I walked to the hospital chapel, the same one where I'd talked to Dr. Weinstein. He was there again, like some kind of cosmic coincidence. I sat next to him and broke down. Completely. Sobbing. Asking if I'd killed my father. If my need for revenge had destroyed everything. Dr. Weinstein let me cry. Then he spoke quietly. "Your brother has been manipulating your family for years. The stress that caused your father's heart attack started long before you filed that police report. You didn't cause this. You just forced everyone to face a reality they'd been avoiding." He paused, then added, "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is enforce consequences. Because without consequences, people don't change. They just keep hurting everyone around them." I wanted to believe him. But sitting in that hospital, surrounded by a family that hated me, I wasn't sure anymore. My father survived the surgery, but the road ahead was brutal. He'd be in the hospital for 2 weeks, then months of rehabilitation. He couldn't work. My mother couldn't work enough to cover their bills. The medical debt was crushing. I sat in the hospital cafeteria the morning after his surgery, drinking terrible coffee, trying to figure out what to do. Dr. Weinstein found me there. Sat down across from me without asking. He didn't waste time. He told me something I needed to hear. You didn't cause your father's heart attack. Years of stress caused it. The stress of enabling an addict. The stress of financial problems. The stress of watching one son destroy himself and the other son suffer for it. You documented Derek's crimes. You didn't invent them. He made those choices. He hurt those people. You just made sure he faced consequences. I told him I wasn't sure anymore. That maybe I'd gone too far. That my family would never forgive me. Dr. Weinstein leaned forward. His voice was firm. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from reality. Your parents have been protecting Derek from reality his entire adult life. And look where it got them. Bankruptcy. A son in jail. Another son who feels betrayed. And a heart attack. He was right. I knew he was right. But it still hurt. Over the next week, something unexpected happened. One of my aunts, Diane, my father's younger sister, approached me in the hospital cafeteria. I braced myself for another attack. But instead, she apologized. She said she'd been watching the family dynamics for years. She'd seen Derek manipulate everyone. She'd wanted to say something but felt powerless. When I'd reported him to the police, she'd initially been angry at me. Thought I'd gone too far. But then she'd watched the news coverage, seen the evidence, talked to the people Derek had scammed, and she realized I'd done what everyone else had been too afraid to do. She offered me something I didn't expect. Money. She had $15,000 saved. She'd loan it to me. Interest-free. I could pay her back whenever I was financially stable. I almost cried right there. I tried to refuse. Told her I couldn't take her savings. She insisted. Said someone needed to bet on me, that I'd spent my whole life being the responsible one and getting punished for it. This was her way of balancing the scales. I accepted. Thanked her. Told her I'd pay back every penny. She smiled. I know you will. That's why I'm giving it to you. 2 days later, another shift happened. Julie Tran's news story got picked up by larger outlets. The story of a brother who exposed his siblings' fraud went regional, then semi-national. It resonated with people who'd dealt with addicts in their families, people who'd been manipulated and gaslit. My original GoFundMe, the one I deleted weeks ago, got brought up in some of the coverage. People started asking if I still needed help with medical school funding. I hadn't thought about medical school in weeks. I'd accepted it was gone. I was focused on working, saving, maybe trying again in a few years. But someone created a new GoFundMe on my behalf. I didn't ask them to. A woman named Sarah, one of Derek's fraud victims, set it up. She explained my situation, linked to the news coverage, and asked people to help me achieve my dream. Within 48 hours, it had raised $12,000. Within a week, $23,000. People were donating $20, $50, sometimes hundreds. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive, strangers telling me I was brave, that they'd been through similar situations with addicted family members, that I deserved a chance at my future. I was stunned, overwhelmed. I'd spent weeks feeling like the villain, and suddenly thousands of strangers were telling me I'd done the right thing. Medical school classmates from Arizona State found the campaign and donated. Professors I'd had donated. Dr. Patel from the hospital donated $500 and wrote a glowing comment about my character and work ethic. Even some of my extended family members who'd initially been hostile started coming around. Not all of them, but enough. The GoFundMe reached $31,000. Combined with Aunt Diane's $15,000, I had $46,000, plus my savings, which had grown to $4,000, $50,000 total. It still wasn't enough for Stanford. That dream was gone. But it was enough for something else. I called the University of Arizona College of Medicine, explained my situation, asked if there was any way to apply for late admission or apply for the next cycle with strong institutional support. They were sympathetic. They'd seen the news coverage. They told me to submit an application for the next cycle starting the following fall. They couldn't guarantee admission, but they'd advocate for me internally. I also reached out to Stanford. Sent an email to Miss Harper, explaining everything that had happened, not expecting anything, just wanting to close that chapter with honesty. She responded 2 days later. Her email made me cry. She'd taken my case to the dean of admissions. They'd been following the news coverage. They understood what I'd been through. Stanford was offering me delayed admission for the following year. Not just admission. A special institutional grant covering $30,000 per year on top of the merit scholarship I'd already been awarded. Combined with federal loans, Aunt Diane's loan, and the GoFundMe money, I could afford it. I could actually afford Stanford. I sat in my studio apartment, staring at the email, unable to process it. Everything I'd lost had somehow come back. Not the way I'd expected. Not because my family had made things right, but because I'd stood up for myself, and strangers had stood up for me. My father was released from the hospital 3 weeks after his surgery. He was weak, shaky, but alive. He asked to see me privately. I went to their house, the same house I'd grown up in. It felt different now, smaller somehow. My father sat in his recliner, the same one he'd been sitting in the day I'd confronted them about the college fund. He looked older, tired, but his eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in years. He apologized, really apologized. Not the defensive, excuse-filled apology from before. A real one. He said he'd failed me. He'd chosen the wrong thing over and over. He'd told himself he was saving Derek's life, but he'd really been enabling Derek's destruction. And in the process, he'd sacrificed me. He couldn't undo the past. The $57,000 was gone forever. My credit was damaged. Years of my life had been affected by their choices, but he wanted to try to rebuild trust, if I was willing. He also told me they'd filed for bankruptcy. They were selling the house. They'd be moving into a small apartment, starting over financially. Derek was in jail awaiting trial. My father said he and my mother weren't bailing him out this time, weren't hiring an expensive lawyer. Derek would use a public defender and face whatever consequences came. It was the first time in Derek's adult life that my parents had enforced a real boundary. My father offered me one thing: my grandfather's medical bag. My grandfather had been a country doctor in rural Arizona in the 1960s and 70s. The bag was old, worn leather, full of history. It was one of the few valuable things my father owned. He wanted me to have it. I took it, held it, felt the weight of it. It represented something. A legacy of healing, of helping people, of doing good work. I thanked him, told him I couldn't promise we'd ever be close again. But I was willing to try to rebuild something. Slowly, he nodded. Said that was more than he deserved. My mother was harder. She came into the room while we were talking. She was stiff, uncomfortable. She couldn't apologize yet. The words wouldn't come, but she said one thing. I don't want to lose both my sons. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a crack in her denial. I told her I'd be in touch, that I needed time. She nodded. Derek pleaded guilty to the fraud charges 3 months later. His public defender negotiated a deal. 3 years in state prison. Restitution to his victims. Mandatory addiction treatment while incarcerated. For the first time in his life, Derek faced real consequences without my parents rescuing him. I felt sad for him. Despite everything, he was still my brother. But I also felt relieved. He couldn't hurt anyone, for at least 3 years. 12 months after that devastating phone call when I found out my college fund was gone, I packed my car and drove to Palo Alto, California. I was 22 years old, starting Stanford Medical School, living in a small apartment near campus that I could afford because of the institutional grant, the federal loans, Aunt Diane's generosity, and the donations from strangers who believed in me. I kept in touch with my father. We talked on the phone every couple weeks, slowly rebuilding something that resembled a relationship. My mother and I exchanged occasional emails. Stiff, formal, but it was communication. Aunt Diane came to my send-off dinner. So did Dr. Weinstein and Dr. Patel. So did a few friends from ASU. My parents didn't come. It was too soon. But they sent a card wishing me luck. I learned brutal lessons through all of this. Lessons that cost me almost everything. You cannot save people who don't want to save themselves. You can love them, support them, but you cannot force them to change. And you will destroy yourself trying. Protecting yourself is not selfish. Setting boundaries is not cruel. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no, is walk away, is enforce consequences. Your dreams matter just as much as anyone else's. You are not required to sacrifice your future for someone else's crisis, especially when that crisis is self-inflicted and repeated. Sometimes family is the people who show up for you, not just the people who share your blood. Aunt Diane showed up. Dr. Weinstein showed up. Strangers on the internet showed up. That meant more than DNA. On my first day at Stanford Medical School, I stood outside the main building with my grandfather's medical bag in my hand. I was alone. No family there to celebrate with me. But I'd earned this. I'd fought for it. I'd lost almost everything and built it back myself. The $57,000 was gone. It would never come back. My relationship with my parents would never be what it could have been. Years of my life had been affected by trauma and betrayal, but I'd learned something more valuable than money. I'd learned that I could survive anything, that I could stand up for myself even when everyone told me I was wrong, that I could enforce boundaries even when it cost me everything. I walked through those doors toward a future I'd fought for. Not the easy path, not the path I'd imagined when I was 12 years old dreaming of becoming a doctor, but a path I'd earned through fire, and that made it mine in a way nothing else could be. I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and keeping peace with your family? Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing cost you everything? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about real people facing impossible choices and finding their way through. And share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to put boundaries first, even with family. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who's struggling with similar choices. Remember, your dreams matter. Your future matters. You matter. Take care of yourselves.